Namaste, Shri Guru Bhyo Namaha. This is Dr. David Frawley, Vamdeva, and I'm very happy to be with the World Association of Vedic Studies, WAVES, for another important seminar, international, and renewal of WAVES' agenda for another crucial year in this very strange era for our world and society today. We greet you via virtual reality. Our reality is becoming more imaginary, or at least virtual, as these days proceed. And we are approaching, you might say, a new view of the universe that is virtual. Now, the subject of my talk is the relevance of Vedanta for the 21st century. I have been with the WAVES organization. I was one of its founding members, I believe, in 1996. And we addressed a lot of issues of human civilization, human history, cultural values, and philosophy, cosmology, yogic spirituality. And it is on this later topic, the yogic spirituality Vedanta, that I wanted to emphasize in this particular talk. And we do seem to be coming into an age, as we say, virtual reality or Maya. We live in a profound Maya. Maya, of course, is one of the key terms of Vedanta, often translated as illusion, even delusion or unreality. But essentially, Maya means appearance. We live in a world of appearances, and behind the appearances is a deeper reality that needs to be investigated, and that is not always indicated by the nature of the appearances involved. The appearances that we see are, of course, defined by our minds and by our senses: eyes, ears, taste, touch, smell. And so we have a sensory view of reality as interpreted outwardly by the mind, and the mind interprets this sensory-based world relative to its own conditioning, much of which is, of course, physically based. So we view the world according to our biological needs, according to our social needs, according to our personal needs. So in other words, the mind is not really a truly objective cognitive agent. The mind is always interpreting, translating. It is pushing things in the direction of its own motivation, volition, imagination, desire. Kama, sankalpa, relative to the Vedic thought, even vikalpa, we're always imagining something based upon our desires, trying to get things or promote our agenda in the social and material world. And as we see, our agenda in the social material world is difficult. We have to compete with other people. We have to endure or go through 20 years of education as a child to function in society. We have to learn a language and function according to certain social values, conventions, and perceptions. And so the mind gets highly conditioned just to protect ourselves, which is to protect the body, the ego, our place in the world. If society were to throw us out, we wouldn't survive. So the mind has that coloring, and the senses have their limitation. On top of that, we have added our instruments, microscopes, telescopes, so many things science has devised to expand the realm of appearances, and hopefully to get what is behind the realm of appearances. But one wonders, if we are getting behind the appearances, or if we are just discovering more layers of appearance that may actually be ultimately endless. You kind of like the reflection of something in a mirror in a hall of mirrors. It just goes on and on and on. You can continue looking further down the hall, but you're really not going anywhere in particular. So this is the issue, and this is the basic concern. And the first thing I want to address here is the Vedanta as a science of consciousness. And what do we mean by consciousness? That is the first thing. And what we have to understand, that consciousness is not mind. Consciousness, chit, chaitanya, atma, purusha, brahman, in the Vedantic sense is not mind. Mind, we could say, is embodied consciousness, manas, chitta, antakarana, in the terminology of the Vedantic thought. So consciousness is a universal, all-pervading principle like space. Everything arises from consciousness, everything returns to consciousness, everything abides in consciousness, but that consciousness is beyond the mind. Various minds and bodies are instruments for consciousness at various levels in various individual embodiments. So consciousness is an unknown factor. Mind is a known factor, but also to some extent an unknown factor, in the sense that we can only know part of the mind. And because mind is embodied consciousness, each individual mind has the needs, the limitations, the perspective, and the orientation of its particular embodiment, which of course varies by time, place, person, culture. Sometimes I would say that the mind is sort of like having a flashlight in a dark cavern. It can show you certain things, but it cannot illuminate the whole. So what do? We turn the flashlight in various directions, even whatever the darkness is, and you see something. And then you try to move the flashlight here and there and try to construct the whole. Well, you can construct something relatively nearby you in physical proximity, but things that are in the distance, the flashlight can't work. At least the old ones couldn't. So we have a patchwork view of reality put together by various sensory perceptions, extensions of sensory perception, various embodied knowledge through books, through numbers, through theories and experiments, and the words of various individuals. But it's still very much a work in progress. We still really don't know who we are or what is the nature of reality. So Vedanta is asking, what is the nature of consciousness in itself? Not the consciousness that is working through the mind's instruments, or through the limitations of language, mathematics, and all the rest of it, which are limited in some ways, even though they can be unlimited in other ways. You have an endless set of numbers, but numbers itself have a certain limitation. So, what is this science of consciousness? It is also called self-knowledge, Atma Vidya, knowing oneself, knowing our true nature behind and beyond body and mind. Now, so far in modern science, medicine, etc., there is nothing beyond body and mind. There is no fundamental reality recognized that is internal, infinite, or has a nature of light, space, and consciousness beyond body and mind. And the more experiment that we do outwardly, and includes on the body, with drugs, with surgery, with analysis of various types, experiments, individual behavior, social behavior, We are still caught in the physical, social, outer view of the human being. Human being is a construct of the mind, is a role in society, is defined by birth and death of the physical body, after which it has no particular relevance and more or less ceases to exist unless you have some religious views that would put you into heaven or some other type of existence. So in this regard, what is the nature of consciousness? So there is an inner being, an inner awareness, sometimes called a witness, a seer, Atman, Purusha, that is not defined by outer appearances. That is beyond name, form, thought, image, and is the power, the being, through which mind and body work. Mind and body are instruments of an organic nature. There is no inherent self in the body, for example. Look at your human body, and what do you see? You see sense organs, motor organs, internal organs, tissues, various organic physiological systems. You have some sort of embodied intelligence. But overall, the body is a network of cells and tissues and so many things that we're not even aware of, and we have no real consciousness of. It's an instrument. It is not a self-being, like your hands and your feet or your eyes and your ears. They are instruments for the mind. But then the question is, what is the mind? Mind is also an instrument. In that respect, the mind resembles our computers quite a bit. It has a word process program. It has a calculation program. It has an imagination capacity. It has a huge memory bank. It has various types of software or conditioned patterns that it goes into for various reasons. Yet it also has volition, motivation. So it does have a sense of existence in its own right that we don't find in the ordinary computer, although with artificial intelligence, we are moving in that direction. And we would have to say that if we could create artificial intelligence that is effective, how much different would it actually be than the mind that we already have? And here, I'll look at both sides of this. In fact, a lot of our human behavior is simply programmed and conditioned. A lot of it is repetitive in nature, and a lot of it can be done by a machine, whether it's being a clerk in a store, whether it's being, working on the farmland, whether it's putting together statistics and graphs and other things. One can argue that artificial intelligence can do most things that human beings can do, and probably do a lot of them better. However, we say artificial intelligence is not self-aware. At the same time, most human beings, we are not self-aware, or we're not self-aware most of the time. We are caught in a routine. We are undergoing various patterns, eating, sleeping, moving, exercise. Even a lot of our thought is habitual. We are continuing patterns that were set in motion in our minds in childhood, or we are repeating the basic news or the basic events of the day that we receive outwardly through certain media or through a certain screen. So we can definitely say that as long as we are in the field of the mind, we are not truly aware, independent, beings. We are largely a product of external circumstances and personal needs. Now, I don't wish to negate human agency or human intelligence here. I'm just saying that this is the appearance, and this is why proponents of artificial intelligence can say to us, okay, you can become under artificial intelligence and live better than you are today. And in the long run, perhaps we can dispense with or reduce our human role and let our artificial intelligence run us. The question is then, what do we do? So let's go back to the Vedantic idea. That we are a consciousness, a light beyond and behind the mind. You say, what is the proof? One of the main proofs is our states of waking, dream, and deep sleep. We are not just in physical reality. And we have a consciousness that can endure from waking, dream, and deep sleep. The second proof is via meditation. In meditation, we can learn to observe the mind and observe our thoughts. And if we turn our awareness within, we discover an inner light, an inner being, a witness, an inner self, for which body and mind are instruments, but do not constitute it. We do have an element of self-awareness, even if we don't cultivate it. We do have volition, responsibility, and capacity to grow and evolve in consciousness. This is the Vedantic view. Even in society, we are held to be responsible for our actions. We have crimes that we are accountable for. We have benefits that we can receive. We have skills and talents that we can develop and gain for. So the human being is a responsible agent, meaning it has some inner self-awareness. Otherwise, there's no need for any jobs, social order. We can all just simply be programmed like artificial intelligence and move that way. But what this means is we have to turn our awareness within. And that is, of course, very difficult because we are looking outwardly. Upanishads say that the human being is created so that all the senses look outwardly. And so only a rare person looks within. Well, that was the time when we only had the outer senses. Now we have every sort of media device and screen so that our bombardment with outer sensations, impressions is many, many times more than it was in the past, which means that the ability to look within is even less because we have to be engaged outwardly. And we're trained to be engaged outwardly at a young age to the extent that many people don't know how to look within. And if they sit down to meditate, they pretend to look within, but the mind is still looking without. So the proposition of Vedanta is there is an inner consciousness that we can discover through inquiry, self-inquiry, meditation, looking behind and beyond thought, rather than simply pursuing a stream of thought. And that occurs when the mind can come into a state of silence or stillness, much like a mirror reflecting reality, rather than its normal interpretive role. Now that, of course, is not easy. For one thing, the interpretive role of the mind is a biological and social necessity. We have to do that to function. And yet we do have higher contemplative, creative, and meditative abilities. We can meditate on space, silence, solitude, infinity. We can look to the eye behind the eye, the inner self, the power through which the ears hear, the eyes see, the prana moves, the voice speaks, the mind thinks. and we can discover a different level of knowledge or awareness. And that is a knowledge of being, not a knowledge of becoming. It's a knowledge of the essence. It is not a knowledge of name, form, and number. It is not a knowledge of quantity, but quality, essence, ananda. We live in an ocean of consciousness in which waves of bodies and minds rise and fall. But at the core of our being, we can go back to that inner essence beyond body and mind. And that is the subject matter, the approach, and there is a methodology for that in Vedanta as a science of consciousness. We could also say the same thing about yoga as a science of consciousness, but yoga has been removed from Vedanta Veda and has been too highly physicalized. And so even though yoga is a science of consciousness, chitta vritti nirodha, negating the mind, tadadrashtu sarupe avasthanam, resting in the pure consciousness, even though that is there at the beginning of yoga, as it is there at the beginning of Vedanta and all through it, it is not very much pursued in yoga today. If it is pursued without any proper preparation. And here is where Vedanta has a very special and important view. And in this regard, the Vedanta teaches us that to discover something, you have to have the appropriate approach, instrumentality, you could also say here. To know our inner being, we have to be able to turn the mind within and silence the mind. But the ordinary human mind is full of the gunas of rajas and tamas, turbulence, desire, distraction, imagination, attachment, inertia, darkness, compulsion, ignorance, all these things. And so it's not possible. The instrument has to be prepared. Mind is the instrument to connect us to consciousness within, just as we must prepare it to connect us to the outer world and to learn how the outer world functions, extending to our own bodies and minds, extending to the brain. So what this means is that we need a different way of knowing based upon direct experience, direct perception, non-language based, non-mental, non-conceptual, direct awareness of the presence. We don't need to get rid of the mind in the sense of a rational cognitive agent. Mind helps us there, like the mirror, but we have to go beyond the mind's conditioning and its limitation. So the science of consciousness requires a fundamental change in human nature, sadhana, and it requires different values and a different way of life. Not any person anywhere at any time can take it up and get the same results without having prepared their body and mind, as we say, creating sattva guna in body and mind in order to do that. So we need that Vedantic science of consciousness. We also need it desperately today to address the issue of how do we deal with our technology without losing control of ourselves or losing control of our world. Are we going to go to a place where the technology dictates who we are and what we do, or we can use the technology to change our outer appearance without dealing with our inner reality? So Vedanta gives us the consciousness in the transcendent, objective, universal sense, so that we can look at our technology from an inner space of awareness and say, this is helpful and that is not. And the fact is, all technology can do for us is essentially outward in nature, but outward in the broader sense of body and mind. Technology can give you faster travel, easier communication, better equipment to work with at various levels. It can make our lives outwardly more easy or free our time from a lot of the outer imperatives that were cast upon us from our physical and psychological limitations as human beings. So we need to cultivate that inner consciousness that is beyond name, form, number, and concept, so that we can use the conceptually numerical based intelligence for what it is for dealing with external reality, but we know how to turn it off, and we do not let it define who we are in our inner being, why we are born, what is our purpose in existence, what is the essence of our being. Were we there before birth, or will there be some identity after death? Is there some karma of lifetimes operating? There are many factors to consider here. But we must look at the whole matter carefully, because if we do not have the inner consciousness to counter the outer information technology, it can be overwhelming. And yet today, in education throughout the world, at even the highest levels of education, we do not find true meditation being taught, or even concentration in a deeper level being taught. Even the power of attention, silence, inner stability. We don't find that inner behavioral values like yamas and niyamas of the yoga system. We don't have that self-discipline, that self-control, going beyond opinions, going beyond like and dislike, attraction and repulsion. We have a highly conditioned and easily triggered mentality that can provoke quickly individual reactions or even collective reactions, sometimes now even extending to mob violence, of course, as it has done throughout history. So there is an educational need to promote and develop the science of consciousness, teach it, and practice it. It must be practiced. If it's not practiced a couple hours a day, then it's not going to mean anything just to read a book on Vedanta or put a picture of a Vedantic guru up on the wall or quote a scientist in Vedanta how they may be connected. The sadhana has to be there, as well as the deep study. And deep study of text. Texts, you say, oh, they're verbal in nature, but no, the texts are also directing us to higher values and realities, and to certain practices, viveka, discrimination between the seer and the seen, vairagya, detachment from the gunas or qualities of nature, pranayama, how to develop a pranic force that will also help purify the mind, pratyahara, turning the senses within, dharana and buddhi shakti, developing a higher awakened intelligence that questions appearances, that says, what is behind appearances? If we look at the world, most of our education is telling us to look behind appearances. Don't trust what people say. Don't trust simply the box. You have to see what it contains. Look behind the meaning of words. Look behind the appearance of the body or the mind. You need to do a lot of research and investigation to know what is the right job for you, what is the right food to eat, even what is the right partner, all these things. But at the same time, we don't look within and try to discover our inner reality. And here, to understand Vedanta, it's very important to go out in nature and to connect with these forces. Sattva guna prevails in nature. Rajas and tamas prevails in human beings, and on that field of nature, then we can expand and understand. Nature shows the waves of the cosmic reality, Parabrahma, and we can then go back to the essence beyond the Maya. As we look within, there is a essential consciousness like the ocean, out of which our thoughts and emotions rise and fall like waves on that sea. So we can do that same investigation, investigate inwardly to the essence of our consciousness, investigate perceptually through nature to the essence of being or existence. What is the place of science in that? Science can prepare the threshold, deal with details, technicalities, practicalities, but there needs to be that inner level of meditation, or what is called samadhi. Samadhi is the direct perception of the silent mind. Samadhi is knowledge by identity, not simply knowledge by perception. All perceptual instruments are mediated. They have limits. They have their particular range of things that they bring in. And to some extent, we'd say they are compromised and biased. There is also a knowing by direct being, direct seeing, direct presence. That is where the Vedanta leads us, and that is where the Vedanta directs us. But again, very profound study is required. We do have organizations like the Chinmaya Mission, Arsha Vidya of Swami Dayananda. We have the traditional Shankaracharya Amats. We have various Vedantic gurus at various levels. And of course, the Vedantic knowledge is there in the yoga, whether it's the Ramakrishna Yoga Vedanta or the Shivananda Yoga Vedanta. It is there, but it hasn't been given the place that it deserves. And even in Vedic studies, Vedanta is not the end of the Vedas. Vedanta is the essence of the Vedas. It is the inner, higher, or even what we could say secret teaching, not secret in the sense that it's intentionally hidden, but it requires a very clear mind, sharp buddhi, and mirror-like awareness in order to understand. That is why academics miss it altogether in the Vedic text. And even those who study Vedantic philosophy don't go very far, because there's no sadhana, there's no purification of the mind or chitta shuddhi, there's no prana shuddhi, deha shuddhi. There is just the basic rajasic buddhi, the intellectually, outwardly trained intellect, studying semantical differences in philosophical text, but devoid of the inner sadhana to truly understand and realize the teachings. It is like a book on how to travel in a certain country, and it's being read by people who not only have never been there, they don't even have a concept that it exists. They think reading about it is the same as going there. And that is why Vedantic studies in academia has been limited. I'm not saying there are exceptions. I'm not saying people who've done great work on text or correlations, but the creation of the self-realized sage is almost unknown outside of India, and certainly not part of usual academic pursuits. So as a world organization of Vedic studies, it must also promote the Vedanta, or even the Yoga Vedanta. I tell people that Veda is the knowledge and yoga is the practice, but that Veda is the knowledge of self-being, universal being, and yoga is the practice of unification with that, not just simply any yoga technique or whatever practice, posture that may be. So World of Associations of Vedic Studies should also conduct research into Vedanta. And of course, we have magnificent Vedantic texts, Adi Shankara, many modern gurus, so many traditional texts. We have Upanishads. Upanishads remain at the cutting edge of global thought even today. Who am I? It's explained there in perfect understanding. And yet so many people miss it, or they treat it as a matter of faith or philosophy than the truth of one's own inner being. And the Vedanta Atma is hidden behind the mantras of the Vedas, whether it's bija mantras like Om, whether it's mantras that are longer like Gayatri or Triambakam, or the Vedantic suktas overall, Mahavakyas, Aham Brahmasmi, special Vedic verses, Purusha Vedam Sarvam. So that knowledge is there at the level of research, and it's useful not just at this ultimate metaphysical sense, The knowledge of Atma, Vedanta, workings of the mind and consciousness is necessary for psychological health and well-being, not only for the individual, but also for the society. And even at social political levels, we are creating so much Maya, propaganda, distortions, fanning so much Rajas and Tamas. We don't have that approach of that inner peace, awareness, silence. We're not just talking about faith or religion. We're talking about an objective inner discernment. And that is what the Vedanta teaches us. It is a science. It is something universal. It is the right use of our consciousness. It is understanding how the consciousness can unfold and evolve in human beings. This has also been discussed in great detail in the works of Sri Aurobindo, Evolution of Consciousness. In humanity, as time goes forward, we are a backward, ignorant, unevolved species at present. So we need to work on ourselves, not simply change the outer world, but cultivate a deeper awareness, consciousness, intelligence within ourselves. And Vedanta, I think, still remains the best path or the easiest path or the most clear, simple concepts, Atman, Brahman, self, all these things, inner being, defined practices, teachings to study, all the techniques of yoga, all the ways of meditation, defining primary values, lifestyle, pursuit of liberation, all these things. So the Vedanta remains extremely important, crucial for the coming century, because without a Vedantic awareness, the Maya of our information technology is going to disrupt us. Sooner or later, we'll evolve through it. It may take a few decades, but the more Vedanta we have, the more we'll be able to deal with it in a positive way and unfold its better essence and reclaim our true human nature, which is the cosmic being, the Purusha, not just a body, a bag of chemicals, or a collection of tissues and organs, a self-aware, universal being manifesting in a particular body and mind at this particular time, but rooted to the non-local, transcendent awareness of the universal and capable of bringing that into our society as well as our personal behavior, creating Vedantic schools of that type. So tremendous work needs to be done. It will be done in the course of time, but we are moving very slowly. Many challenges are here today because they have become crucial in terms of health or even now economy. So we do need patience, but long term, that is where we need to go. So with these words, I will close my talk here today. Again, I thank the World Association of Vedic Studies for continuing these various levels of research, not only in Vedanta, but at many other levels as well. Many aspects of the wonderful field of Vedic knowledge, which is also including yoga, Ayurveda, Sanskrit, all the cultural factors, music, dance, temples, everything. That has its importance as well, because the Vedic knowledge, yogic knowledge overall, Sanatana Dharma, shows how to support that Vedantic wisdom of self-knowledge, self-realization, and spread it into the whole of life. So with these words, I'm very happy again to be part of this conference, and I'm happy to see it going forward. And I wish the World Associated Vedic Studies another wonderful future and greater relevance as time goes on. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Hari Om Tat Sat.